Recording. And I'm going to let people in now.
Thanks, Alex. Hello, everyone. It is so exciting to see all of your bright and shiny pretty faces this morning. My name is Mary Del Hayes, and I'm here as part of the Together SC team. We're going to give folks a minute to get settled in. We've had a number of people ask for the recording of this session, so please know that we are recording, and we'll be sharing the recording and any other materials that you need following this. We think this is a great opportunity to share some really important information. One of the things that when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we often leave out accessibility. And so accessibility is a critical part of that work. And we know that part of Together SC's strategic initiatives, one of them is to ensure that there's a diverse and adequate talent pipeline for the nonprofit sector. And so we are really excited to be here with all of you today. And one of my favorite people in the entire wide world, if you have not met this amazing woman yet, you are in for a treat. I'm excited to introduce you to my dear friend, Kimberly Tissot, who is the CEO of Able South Carolina. And Kimberly is amazing for a lot of reasons, but a little bit about her bio. She completed her undergraduate education at Boston University and has an MSW from USC. And Kimberly has been with Able South Carolina now for almost 10 years. Is that
12
right?
years.
12 years. Oh my gosh. Where she has tremendously grown the profile of the organization and had a number of incredible successes, especially in legislative advocacy and in advancing opportunities for people with disabilities, specifically with some big wins around the right of people with a disability to parent. And most recently, some incredible work to end sub-minimum wage. And so I didn't even know that sub-minimum wage was a thing. I didn't know that you could legally pay people less than the minimum wage, but you can in South Carolina. And so I'm sure she'll get into some of these really, really incredibly important advances that we're working on across the state, again, to improve accessibility. We know that anytime you talk about accessibility, people think about the ADA, which is an incredibly complicated challenge to navigate appropriately and successfully as an executive director and operations person for a nonprofit organization. And we're just really grateful that all of you are here to learn from Kimberly. And Kimberly, we're so grateful to you for sharing your expertise today. You can expect to see more about accessibility and opportunity in our comp and benefit study, which will be released on October 12th. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Kimberly.
Thanks, Mary Del. Hey, everyone. I am Kimberly Tissot. I'm so excited to spend the morning with you all. Just real quick, I did put a very important link in the chat box, askjan.org. That's always a wonderful reference to go to. You can actually go look at different accommodations that can be available for any person with any type of disability. There's a lot of amazing stuff on mental health resources, COVID resources, long COVID, and then all of the other disabilities that are protected under the ADA. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen. And let's see. All right, can you all see the main screen?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So what I'm going to do today is we're going to talk all about equitable hiring practices and workplace accessibility. Now, with workplace accessibility, what I'm going to really do is talk to you guys about welcoming people with disabilities in your organization, as we all have a role to play with providing an inclusive community, including all marginalized communities, including people with disabilities. If I was presenting to you all today, I am a person with a physical disability. I have one leg from a childhood cancer, and my style of mobility is walking on crutches. And the reason why I say my style of mobility is because a lot of people think that I should have a prosthetic leg, but I do not, and that is my choice. And I don't need two legs. And so I always like to start off with that, because I'm very comfortable with walking on crutches, and that is my style. And that should always be a choice for a person with a disability, should always be number one within all services, but also with employment, and especially when it comes to accommodations. My pronouns are her and she, and I am the president and CEO of Able South Carolina. I've been there for about 12 years, well, a little bit over 12 years. And like Mary Dell said, we do a variety of different services, and we'll get in that shortly. Just a visual description of myself as well. I am a person who is white, in my 40s. I have blonde hair, and I'm wearing tortoise shell glasses. And I am wearing a purple and pink dress, floral dress. And I always do visual descriptions just in case somebody has low vision or who is blind on, and that is really best practice to do visual descriptions. So today we're going to have a couple learning objectives. First, nonprofits will understand their responsibilities under disability rights laws and how to have a welcoming environment. And some of that welcoming environment will come with kind of changes, attitudinal changes. Participants will have a better understanding about who is a person with a disability, because you're going to be very surprised today that disability is extremely broad. Participants will learn the benefits of hiring people with disabilities, and you will also be able to name at least 3 strategies with recruiting, hiring, and employing people with disabilities. So first, I do want to talk a little bit about who we are as an organization. Able South Carolina, we are a disability-led organization seeking transformational changes in systems, communities, and within individuals. And so since 1994, we've remained a consumer-controlled, community-based, cross-disability nonprofit that seeks South Carolina to be a model, a national model of equity and inclusion for people with disabilities. And so that is what we are really striving for. We are the state's oldest and largest federally recognized disability-led organization. There's only 4 disability-led organizations in the state, and more than 3/4 of our staff are people with disabilities, as well as our board of directors. So we are a team of about 53 people, and about 86% are people with different disabilities. And on our board, there's about 64% of our board who have disabilities. And so obviously we practice co-equality, disability justice, and we ensure that representation is occurring throughout the state. And we practice true inclusion through our consumer-driven independence and, of course, disability pride. So I always like to say, we didn't just learn this, but as our staff and our board, our consumers, as people with disabilities, our work doesn't end when we leave the office, just because of how society may treat us, or how society is just not set up for us. And so disability is a part of who we are, and we live it every day, and we navigate the barriers that we face. And just a little bit about our mission and vision. We recently updated our vision and mission statement just to explain a little bit more about what we do, because we do so much. We are an organization, again, of people with disabilities, and that is really important. And I like to stress that, because when representation is so important, it's critical to hear the voices of people with disabilities and ensure that they're at the table when you're making any programs, services, policies, laws about us. So we do equip people with disabilities with the tools to foster pride and direct their own lives. And so that is through individual services. We provide about services to about over 3,000 consumers per year. And then we do a lot of group services, which are not counted in that individual service. We educate the community to challenge the stereotypes and eliminate the barriers. So we have a whole team that really goes out into the community and ensures that places of business are accessible, including state agencies, nonprofit organizations, and they're accessible following the ADA, but also really truly making an effort for true equity. And then we also do a lot of advocacy for access, equity, and inclusion at the individual, local, state, and national level. And so we're going to get into the nitty-gritties of the federal laws that protect the rights of people with disabilities. And we are protected significantly. And sometimes that is being ignored. So I'll talk a little bit in the next slide about what our obligations as nonprofits are under disability rights legislation on the federal level. So our vision is a South Carolina that is a national model of equity and inclusion for all people with disabilities. And so we still see quite a bit of segregation, discrimination in our state. So we have a long ways to go towards that, but that is definitely what we are striving for. And I hope to see it in the next 12 years. The image that you'll see on the screen is just our staff at the Advocacy Day for Access and Independence outside of the South Carolina State House. That event usually occurs in April of each year, and we advocate at the State House to remove barriers that are impacting people with disabilities throughout South Carolina. So now let's talk about obligations under federal disability rights legislation. Now, you guys are going to maybe not know some of this. I know typically when I meet with my peers on the nonprofit level, sometimes I see their mouth drop open or they're like, oh my goodness, I had no clue. Well, guys, you were very safe with us. We do not file complaints. We are not attorneys. We want to make sure that nonprofit organizations and anyone serving the community are fully equitable for people with disabilities. And so you are safe with us. You can always contact me after we talk about this. We can definitely talk about this when we go to the comments and questions. So nonprofits' obligations under federal disability rights legislation. There's a couple big laws that protect our rights within all areas. So first, which is the second major disability rights law throughout the country, is the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so that was passed in 1990, and it was amended in 2008 and 2010. But states, what this law states is you cannot treat anybody with a disability unfairly because of a disability. The ADA requires public and state agencies to provide accommodations so people with disabilities have the same access to services as people without disabilities. The ADA also requires that agencies make sure that these accommodations are available for people with disabilities to get information and their own needs. So a lot of times accommodations are very much individualized and should every nonprofit should have an accommodation process. So when somebody with a disability needs to access your services or are applying for a job or receiving a job, getting hired with you all should have a reasonable accommodation policy within your employment handbook, but also within all of your services that you provide. So the ADA has 4 titles and then 1 miscellaneous title. And so Title I is employment. If anyone, let's see if I can see the chat. Mary Darrell, you may have to help me with this because I can't see the chat, but how many of you who are on have more than 15 employees? You want to just say yes in the chat or raise your hand. So we've got 2 people. Okay. And we're going to go into some of this is going to fall within your area. So Title I is for employment. So this is the only law, this is the only title in the ADA that makes a requirement. If you have 15 or more employees, you have to follow Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And what that law does is it prevents any type of discrimination on the basis of disability, but also requires the employer to make reasonable accommodations. And so that's where that policy really falls in. If a staff member needs a reasonable accommodation to perform their work, that should be allowed and requested, and the employer should look into the situation and provide the accommodation if it's something that both the employer and the employee agree on. Title II is local and state government. All local and state government entities must accommodate people with disabilities, meaning everything from their programs to websites to buildings must be fully accessible for people with disabilities. And this also includes the transportation system. So any state or local transportation, so folks in Columbia, the Comet has a lot of rules and policies that they have to follow to ensure that their bus system, bus stops, and routes are fully accessible for people with disabilities. Public accommodations is Title III. And so that's going to be where a lot of nonprofits fall in. Public accommodations and any entity that provides services open to the public, they have to be fully accessible, meaning their building, their services, intake, their website has to be fully accessible. And so those are going to be things that you may need to examine after this webinar today. Then we have telecommunications, and telecommunications is something that calls relay services, and throughout the state and throughout the country as well. Relay services is where somebody who's deaf dials 711 to access your services, and you on the other line there is an interpreter that is interpreting what the person who is deaf is interpreting via a video phone. And so every state must have a telecommunication system such as relay services, and it's very easy to use. All you have to do is dial 711 on your phone, and if you need to call somebody who's deaf, or if somebody needs to call your organization, they'll call 711 and give them your phone number, and then they'll call you. So making sure that your staff is aware of how to talk to relay operators. And then there's miscellaneous and technical provisions, and this really protects somebody with a disability from any type of retaliation or coercing or threatening somebody with a disability. So this really just protects them even further. So I'm going to go to the next slide. And so the next law that we'll talk about is Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And so this act is a national law that protects people with disabilities from being treated unfairly due to their disability. So this law applies to organizations that get any financial assistance or federal financial assistance from the federal government, including HHS, but it also includes any type of federal grants. And so I know our organization has a couple federal grants. And so because we have dollars coming into from the federal government, we have to follow the Rehabilitation Act, Section 504. And so ensuring that we have the proper policies, ensuring that our site is accessible, making sure that our hiring practices are in place. Then we have Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which is a national law that states that federal agencies must provide, so federal agencies or any agencies that are getting federal funding must provide information in a way that is accessible for everyone. And so this really goes back to the website and providing information in alternative formats, such as Braille, plain language, large font. But Section 508 also mandates that your website, if you're providing any services to the public, that your website is fully compliant. And that is where a lot of people go, oh my goodness, I don't even know what this means. And what the reasoning for your websites needing to be accessible is people who use screen readers. A lot of times, people who are blind, people who have low vision may have a difficult time with reading your website if they're unable to access it because you do not have it set up correctly. And so a lot of web designers sometimes do not know how to do this. And so it's very important to make sure that your website is getting checked and making sure that it is accessible so that anybody who's blind can access your services now, or apply for a position within your organization. The blind community is fairly large in South Carolina. And so that's something that I would definitely take a look at. And then any nonprofits that are within the healthcare system who have to follow the Affordable Cares Act by any way, but the Affordable Cares Act has put in a lot of protections for people with disabilities to ensure that we're not being treated unfairly, ensure that we're not being discriminated, but also making sure that the language that they're using within informational tools, stuff about preventing serious illness, that should also be made to be fully accessible to people with disabilities. And the Affordable Cares Act has also done a really great job with ensuring that medical providers are fully accessible. So any kind of medical equipment is accessible for people with disabilities. So just a summary of nonprofits' responsibilities in general is ensuring that the interview and hiring practices are inclusive of people with disabilities. So making sure that you are prepared if someone asks for a reasonable accommodation to be selected for an interview. What does that look like for you? What are your hiring practices looking like for you? Is that inclusive of people with disabilities? Accessible program services. So this is an area that we see a lot of times within the nonprofit world, that accessible program services are not available. A lot of folks do not know how to properly serve people with disabilities. So making sure that you are looking at your services and including the disability community with making sure that people can access your services that you're providing. And I always, when we are creating services, we are consumer driven. So our consumers actually give the basis of our services, but we always go through steps with making sure that they are accessible by saying, how would somebody who is blind access our services? How would somebody who is deaf access our services? And go down the line, people with psychiatric disabilities, people who have physical disabilities, people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities, and go down that line to really make sure that your programs are accessible or how you can modify them if they are not. Providing accommodations to the public to access your services. And so this is really simple. If someone is calling your organization and in needing assistance with, maybe you have an eligibility process or you have forms that need to be completed and somebody may not be able to complete them on their own, you would be required to provide an accommodation to assist them with completing any needed information for services. Accessible events. So if you're hosting events in the community, making sure that they are accessible for the public. Easy strategies to do that. If you have a registration process, you can ask, if there is any accommodation need so that you can be prepared. But if you are providing any kind of event or hosting any kind of event in the community that is open to anyone from the public, no registration, it is critical that you are providing all of the necessary things to ensure that your event is accessible. And we have a great resource that is on our website around accessible events. Effective communication, including alternative formats. And so making sure that all of your materials can easily be transcribed into plain language that helps people with intellectual disabilities understand the content. We see issues a lot with other organizations that are providing a curriculum-based service. And sometimes the curriculum may not be accessible, but it does not mean that it can't be accessible. It's easily, anything can easily be made accessible. It just takes a couple strategies to make sure that all people with disabilities can access it. Anti-discrimination policies and procedures. So disability is a protected class and is considered the largest minority group throughout the country. And so I'll get to that side shortly and kind of show you why this is critical for us. Architectural accessibility, of course. I think when people hear about the ADA, they think, oh, well, that means you have to have ramps. There's codes for about everything. So the book is about, the codes are about 600 pages, but there's codes for even how high water comes out of a water fountain. So it's not just about a ramp. It's about, if you are putting a ramp up, there's specific measurements to the incline that really has to be made properly to code. There a lot of, we see sometimes people will paint something blue, paint a parking lot blue, and they're like, oh, that's the accessible space. And no, there's actually several requirements to ensure that a parking space is accessible. There's like 3 types of parking spaces for people with disabilities. And then accessible websites. So again, that is a requirement under the federal law to ensure that your websites are accessible if you're offering any services out to the public. So how do you welcome people with disabilities? So the first step I always say is plan programming to include equitable access for people with disabilities. And with this, you've got to really think about your implicit bias that you have towards people with disabilities as well. That is definitely out there. You may think somebody, just because somebody shows up at your office and they have a disability, that they're vulnerable. You really need to check yourself and making sure that you are giving people equitable opportunities to access your services. Our South Carolina law is a little bit confusing when it comes to vulnerable adults. That's something that our organization is working on, because people, just because somebody has a disability does not make them vulnerable. We've seen a lot of folks not get the services that they sought to get because the assumption that somebody is vulnerable and they'll call DSS. So be very mindful that you're providing that equitable access for services. Ensure you have disability representation in your marketing and outreach. Sometimes if we don't see ourselves listed on your website or see images of people with disabilities, we're not feeling welcomed. And so making sure that you're looking at your marketing and outreach materials. Ensure materials and websites are accessible again. Provide disability cultural and awareness training to your staff and board, and understanding that disability is a culture. It's something not to feel sorry about, but it's really to make sure that we are overcoming the barriers. Nobody with a disability ever overcomes our disability, nor that we need to, but the barriers are what we strive to overcome. And so that's so understanding that and having that awareness will really help with ensuring that your staff are properly trained to provide services. Ensure your building is accessible. That's definitely important for people who have visual disabilities, people with physical disabilities. So making sure that you do have an ADA compliant office. And if you provide services in the field, making sure that you're providing services in a accessible building, and making sure that you're checking the building out. And there's great resources, and our organization can help you all as well. Including disability in all your diversity, inclusion, and equity work. And a lot of times people leave disability out, but you really can't be equitable if you do leave out disability. Disability intersects with all communities. And so we We are within all communities with different races, different socioeconomic status, education. So we're across the board. And so making sure that you understand that. And we have been, our community has been discriminated or further marginalized within other marginalized communities because of not being aware of how disability is so relevant. Recruiting disabled board members to help you have that voice at the table to ensure that folks are looking at accessibility of your organization services. Develop an accommodation policy and include a line item in your budget. I always encourage nonprofit leaders to include this within their budget, not only because it's responsible, but it also helps you kind of keep your staff trained and educated about the need to provide accessible accommodations to the folks that you're serving or the communities. And so simple accommodation request, things that you could provide if you're having an event, you can use that accommodation line item to pay for American Sign Language interpreters, or if you're doing something via Zoom captioning sometimes, if somebody comes into your services for your services and may need assistance with getting something made in plain language, you can easily pay and use that budget line item. Or you can make, definitely make changes within your own office environment to include folks with disabilities. And then include people with disabilities in all that you do, including program designs and services. So what does it mean to have a disability? So what is a disability? And what does it exactly mean? And so under the ADA, the people who are covered under the ADA are individuals who have a disability, have a record of having a disability, or as regarded as having a disability. And so obviously having a disability is one thing, but have a record, so somebody who might have had a temporary disability at one time, or as regarded as maybe assuming that somebody has a disability, so all of that population is protected. So what exactly is a disability? So a disability is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And think about this in a very broad way. So a major life activities. So people, where the law says physical and mental impairments, physical quote unquote impairments could easily be somebody who is blind, somebody who is deaf. And so think about it in a very broad area because it is very, very broad. So major life activities include things like eating, seeing, hearing, thinking, walking, talking, driving, getting out of bed, climbing stairs, being able to keep themselves safe, emergency response, sleeping, standing, lifting, concentrating, reading, learning, any operations of bodily functions. So a lot of different endocrine, immune systems, digestive, bowel, bladder, neurological, brain, heart. So think about all of that. And then of course, this list goes on and on. But specific disabilities include people with physical or mobility disabilities. So something that is impacting them if the way that they walk or move about within the community. Speech disabilities, learning disabilities, psychiatric, hearing, visual, intellectual and developmental disabilities, health disabilities. So cancer, asthma, COPD, heart conditions are all people who are protected under the ADA. And then of course, temporary disabilities. And so why does this all matter? So disability truly does impacts us all. Over 61 million Americans have some type of disabilities, and 1 in 4 Americans has a disability. Now, South Carolina actually has a higher than national rate of disability, with 1 in 3 South Carolinians having a disability. So a very large population. And the reason why we should all make sure that we are being as inclusive as we possibly can. So very large population. So people with disabilities only within employment. And so we are definitely working on this. But only 34.6% of people with disabilities in South Carolina are actually employed. And these are people that are wanting to be employed and who have several degrees, sometimes a lot of training, and they're really not even getting their foot into the door, because once the employer may learn that they have a disability or see that they have a disability, sometimes they're not given that opportunity. People with disabilities are more than twice as likely to be unemployed than people without disabilities. And so that's a pretty significant gap. And then South Carolina has one of the country's highest unemployment rates for people with disabilities. So we just actually moved up a point, but we rank number 7 for having the highest unemployment rate in the country. And so a lot of this is contributed to perceptions. That is our number one barrier always, is perceptions and implicit bias. So people not truly understanding what we are capable of, but also not understanding their responsibilities under the Americans with Disabilities Act and fully accommodating folks with disabilities. So let me go back, I jumped. So why should everyone hire people with disabilities? So a survey that came out from the Institute for Corporate Productivity found that companies that hire individuals with disabilities see the addition of having highly motivated employees demonstrating an inclusive and diverse culture that is attractive to critical talent pools and improving customer satisfaction. So the importance of hiring people with disabilities at all levels is creating a culture from top down, everyone included in the environment. So if there's 1 in 3 people with a disability in South Carolina, you should most likely have somebody on your staff representing that community. We do have an example of, someone thinks that someone with autism would be really good at an IT job. While some may be good at this, it's also an individual level. And so there's a lot of assumptions what people with disabilities are capable of doing based off of the type of disability. And so remembering to not base it off of that as well. And would you stereotype someone based on any other type of factors such as gender, race, or any other population? And so really thinking that and really seeing disability as a minority group. We are one of the largest minority groups, and also we're marginalized significantly. So perception versus reality. So among the high performance companies surveyed, more than 80% reported a positive experience with their employees with disabilities. You usually don't see those kind of numbers for HR departments that have started with hiring initiatives. And this quote is, it says, likely that the employers had anticipated certain challenges that weren't there and resources to support them were greater than they had realized. There is a lot of myths about hiring people with disabilities, but according to a lot of data, it is actually a benefit to hiring people with disabilities because there's higher retention rates. So as we are seeing people leave often and not stay within jobs, people with disabilities, it's been found, and there's evidence to show the retention rate. There are some really great real cost savings through obviously turnover, as I know all nonprofits are feeling that. And then also just studies have shown that consumers prefer doing business with people who hire inclusively and hire people with disabilities. So there's a brand value to your organization by hiring people with disabilities. And then also research has also found that organizations employing people with disabilities have a higher morale and employee engagement, which also, drives productivity within the organization. So there are a lot of benefits to hiring people with the disabilities. Another fact is people with disabilities call out less than people without disabilities. And it's been shown that people with disabilities are currently an untapped labor force. When there's several people, there are many people, hundreds of people in South Carolina that are ready for employment, but have not been given that opportunity. And then, so key number one benefit is the talent pool. So 8.3% of people with disabilities who are unemployed have a bachelor's degree or higher, compared to 4.5% of those with no disability who are unemployed. And so a lot of times within disability culture, people will go back and get additional degrees because they're having a difficulty with getting employed. And we've seen this for decades. And so there's a lot of very highly qualified and highly educated people with disabilities that have not been given the opportunities. Culture and diversity. So these talented professionals bring unique experiences that foster innovation and new ideas while contributing to a culture of warmth and true inclusion. And so something that I will say that people with disabilities are very good at, because we learn it very early on, is really adapting to a new environment, coming up with solutions. We're very solution oriented because we have had to provide solutions for ourselves with navigating society. And so there's a lot of data that shows that and just provides that different perception when you do hire somebody with a disability and the problem solving. I keep skipping a slide, guys. So benefits of hiring people with disabilities continued. It's good business. There's a lot of data that shows that consistently employers consistently rate workers higher or average who have a disability in performance, quality of work, flexibility on demands. And 92% of the American public views companies that hire people with disabilities more favorable. And then accommodation costs. So this is a myth. Sometimes employers feel that hiring somebody with a disability will be more expensive because of their accommodations. But employers note that 59% of the accommodations cost nothing. So a lot of accommodations are absolutely free. And 75% reported that accommodations were either effective or extremely effective. And this is my philosophy, guys. We all want our staff to do the best at their job. And that's the same for people with disabilities. But if you kind of change your mindset within your organizations and think about accommodations across the board, you want folks to have the tools to be as fully productive as possible and do the essential job functions. And so making sure that you're giving all of your staff the tools that they need to do their jobs. But when it does come to people with disabilities, you do have that obligation and requirement under the law that to provide accommodations. And I'll just give you a little bit of our data too, just to show you as a disability-led organization that hires people with significant disabilities, our accommodation cost for our employees across the board is around $2,500 a year. So it's pretty inexpensive. And for our organization, because we are a disability focused organization, our accommodations run about $50,000 to $60,000 a year with providing all the accommodations that we have to provide within our service. So that's ASL interpreters, but that would not be as high for all other organizations. And then recruiting. So the talent, what are you looking for? And are you looking to just fill a position? And really looking, what kind of personality, what are you wanting from when you are hiring? Is it loyalty? And really look at that when you post a position. Identify essential job function. What is really essential about the requirements of a job? There's been some job announcements that have said, you have to have a high school diploma, you have to have a driver's license, but there's no driving involved within the position. And so really going back and looking at your essential job functions and requirements for the position. Is it really essential? South Carolina does not have a variety of high school diplomas. For people to leave high school, we have the high school diploma, we have the high school credential, which a lot of times people with disabilities unfortunately fall under, where they graduate high school or they leave high school with a high school certificate that only shows that they attended high school. Does not it's not any type of high school diploma. But we also have something that's called the high school credential. And the high school credentials in South Carolina, it's for people with usually developmental or intellectual disabilities that could not necessarily do the academic requirements to finish high school to get a high school diploma, but they are job ready because they get a credential and are required to do a certain amount of courses and on-job training and actually paid work experience as well. And so there's a lot of employees, potential employees, that may not have gotten that high school diploma, but have the high school credential that should be factored in. And there's a lot of information on the Department of Education's website if you want to learn more about the credential. And then the application process. Is it accessible? Is number one. So if you're having your application on your website, is it accessible in the first place? And so making sure that you are welcoming applicants with all types of different disabilities by ensuring that your resources about the position or your application process is accessible. And then, of course, just re-examining your website, social media, are people with disabilities being featured? There is no way, and I tell nonprofits this all the time, you are serving people with disabilities. You just may not know it because they may have invisible disabilities. And so making sure that you're still accessible and inclusive and are meeting the needs of the folks that are coming through your doors. And then building relationships is another strategy. Relationships in the community, as we all know, as nonprofits, we definitely cannot do our work without these relationships. And so looking at creating relationships with high schools, technical colleges, four-year colleges, staffing agencies, disability organizations, employer networks, vocational rehabilitation, and just business networks. Folks know where people with disabilities are within all of these entities and can definitely help connect you to good, viable candidates. And then something that you can make to make your job advertisements more friendly is providing an equal opportunity statement. But when you're providing an equal employment statement, opportunity statement, we often don't see disability. But disability is, again, a protected class that you cannot discriminate against. And so here are just some examples of really strong diversity and strong EEO statements that protect all protected classes. And so you would say your company's name values diversity and race, color, religion, sex, national origin, age, disability, genetics, and more. We work hard to ensure equal employment opportunities for staff and potential staff from all backgrounds. With something that we add, because we do have a mandate to hire people with disabilities within our funding source, is people with disabilities encouraged to apply, just to make sure that it's out there, because sometimes people with disabilities they've been rejected so many times that they don't see that welcoming when they're looking at job postings. Accommodations for applicants available quickly upon request. And so that's something else that you want to do, especially for any kind of interviewing processes or helping complete the application. But must provide the essential duties with or without an accommodation. You can put that on your job postings as well. So that shows somebody that the essential duties must be done with or without accommodations. And remember, accommodations even out the playing field. so that somebody can do their job and do the essential functions. It does not give special treatments, and it does not say that somebody doesn't have to perform the essential duties because they have a disability. It's just a tool, any kind of accommodation to help them do their job. And then just policies and procedure checklists, just making sure that you have accommodation requests that folks can fill out, either employees or potential employees, but also making sure that your services, I like to stress that because you have to model that throughout. Optional medical documentation required. And if you do provide any type of medical, if you are requiring any type of medical documentations or for hiring process or a health exam, making sure that you do this to everybody. Because if you only single out folks with disabilities, that is an ADA violation. Managing confidential health and HR information. So if someone is requesting a reasonable accommodation, that information should be stored separately from the HR records as well. Pre-approved accommodations. So having a list kind of sure, we're going to give you this, we're going to give you this, but making sure that you are officially sending them documentation that says you are providing them X, Y, and Z accommodations. Budgeting for accommodations, again, this will, you cannot use the defense of, we don't have enough funding. You can't use that under the ADA. So you have to provide accommodations. And again, a lot of times they're very inexpensive. Evaluation of accommodation effectiveness. Sometimes it's a trial and error thing, just like most things in life. Sometimes if you provide an accommodation and it doesn't work, don't give up, seek another option. So brainstorming that through the interactive process with your employee with a disability of brainstorming additional supports or additional accommodations that may help them do their essential functions. And then more about reasonable accommodations is just, a reasonable accommodations may make it possible for every employee or employees with a disability to reach their highest level of productivity. So providing or modifying equipment, sometimes you can just modify things. Something that we do often in our office building is sometimes our doors, internal doors, are too heavy to open. And so we just adjust the hinge. It's very inexpensive to do, but it allows somebody to easily open a door. Making facilities accessible by removing the barriers, providing information in alternative formats, again, and then modifying policies and procedures. And so really thinking, and sometimes you do have to modify policies and procedures because I think we all learn from our employees. And so making sure that you're keeping up and so that you have a sustainable practice with your modifications. And the importance of declaring the disability. So the employers have the right to decide if they will require medical documentation of a disability before honoring any accommodation request. Now, we do not do that. Ours is just self-disclosure because we're just very mindful of the type of organization we are. But if you're questioning, you can absolutely require medical documentation if someone requests an accommodation. The employee has the right to decide if they want to declare their disability. And so you can't force them and you can't say, I see your disability is preventing you from working. You can't say that if they've never disclosed it. And some people, again, are very uncomfortable with disclosing their disability just because of the bias. They must, obviously, they must disclose to the appropriate individual, whether that is your supervisor or the employer, the HR. It really varies across different organizations, but make sure that is in your policies and procedures who the accommodation must be requested to. And all records and information regarding an employer's health information should be confidential and well protected. So you can't talk about the accommodation. You can't say, well, I provided Sue JAWS on her computer because she's a person who's blind. People still may not know that she's blind. Maybe she's low vision. And so you can't disclose somebody's disability to other employees. And then just general staff training on disability culture, make it recognize that disability is important to your team, and working from a place of inclusion, and be open-minded regarding disability in the workplace. And disability training can be a valuable tool in adjusting the workplace culture to be more welcoming as well. And then accessible benefits. So the ADA prohibits discrimination on all employment practices, including tenure, layoffs, leave, fringe benefits, and all other employment-related activities. So here's an example: is just if an employee provides gym membership as a benefit to employees, the gym must also be accessible for people with disabilities. If it is not, the employer may open itself to a Title I complaint. And we are very careful with that in all that we do as well. So when we have outside speakers come in, when we have trainings, we ensure that they're fully accessible, so that it is accessible to everyone, and it shouldn't be a Title I complaint. That everyone is receiving effective information. And then retention and advancement. So consider developing an employee resource group focused on disability, and that could be part of your DEI initiatives. When you are hiring for a position higher in the organization, do not overlook your employees with disabilities. So there is a habit, and we see this all over the place, but grocery stores will sometimes just keep people with disabilities in a particular position, like being a bagger or being somebody who goes and collect carts. That is not their full potential. And so making sure that you don't just say, oh, well, this position is for a disabled person. You cannot do that. By working with somebody, you will know their work and how to accommodate them, and how to make accommodations in the position they'll leave open. And so making sure that you are easily, offering that opportunity for that advancement. And then you can also learn more information. Here's a simple plug. We are having an employer summit on October 19th from 9:30 to 3 o'clock. And this is all a one-day conference for HR professionals. And what folks will be doing is learning best practices and about hiring and retaining employees with disabilities. And this event is hybrid. So it's in person and also virtual. And so you can always go to our website, or you can go to hiremesc.org, and there's a lot of resources for employers as well. And then Able Access, this is a program that we offer within our organization, and we provide a lot of technical assistance to nonprofits, businesses, state agencies, you name it, to ensure that they are practicing and following the requirements under laws. But we also assist with helping them understand more of a universal design approach. Like, how do you serve everybody in the community, and really looking at the multi-marginalized intersections as well, and making sure that, if you are serving multi-marginalized folks, that you're understanding the different layers of that. But we do that through a number of different services. We do provide architectural accessibility assessments. We do digital accessibility testing, so we can look at your website and make sure that it's accessible for you. We do professional trainings and keynote speakers. And then we also do policy and procedure review to help organizations. And again, all organizations that come to us are safe. Our job is just to make people and organizations stronger, make individuals with disabilities stronger, so that we can all be independent in the community. So I am going to open it up for questions. And Mary Dell, do you have a process for this?
All right. If you have questions, feel free to jump off of mute or to drop them in the chat. And I'll go ahead and lead off with a question. Kimberly, one of the things that I ran into when I was an executive director was we had an employee who had some accommodations for an invisible disability, and the other staff did not know about that person's disability and thought she was getting special treatment. And so can you provide some advice about how to navigate that with staff, since you can't disclose, that person's accommodations?
Yeah, and sometimes that's why I think it's so important to provide that kind of all-inclusive, universal strategy within your organization too is provide the tools that they need. And having that be an open dialogue of, if anybody needs accommodations, please come to us. But also looking at these very specific disability accommodations. They should not be seen as special treatment at all. It should just be equaling out the playing field. And so sometimes employees with disabilities are very open about their disabilities, but of course there's more stigma around some disabilities like intellectual, developmental, but also unfortunately psychiatric disabilities. And so sometimes people are not going to disclose those. And so what my answer always and what we recommend folks just saying is, if you need something that can help you do your job, let me know and we can provide it, and just kind of have that be a universal option.
Any other questions out there? I do want to remind everyone that Kimberly's amazing team will come out to your site. They will work with you and hold your hand the whole way through making sure that your workplace is accessible, not just for your staff, but for the clients that you serve. And so that can be really helpful. Jen, I see your hand up. Feel free to jump in.
Yes, thanks for having me today. This was very informative and helpful. I work with a number of nature centers and do a lot of outdoor educational programming and things like that. And I would love to make our interpretive displays more inclusive. And so I'm wondering a couple things. Do you have any vendors you recommend? I'd love to get some quotes on, what to do and also how to do it. And then I'd also, if you have any information about grant funding opportunities for such things, we just would love to make our whole experience more inclusive for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that folks are thinking about this. I know that we're currently working with a couple of Museum of Art to make fully inclusive exhibits, and that's how we should all be thinking. So I love that. You can always contact us too. We can always come out and make recommendations and come up with affordable solutions for you all. And we're always looking within grants for making accessibility, but usually if you I've never seen any grants not allow accommodations too. And so I know when we have grants, we also have a line item to ensure that there are accommodation needs being addressed within the grants too, because I think funders like to see that as well.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? I bet you have a million questions. You don't even know where to start. I know that's how I usually feel. We do have a question about what accommodations you might need to provide around mental health. And I think that's something that we're all navigating right now with the impact of COVID, with a lot of people uncovering a lot of things around anxiety, depression, and other issues like that. So can you talk briefly about the mental health component of disability, Kimberly?
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is a very individualized, and a lot of times people do not see these accommodations. And so I don't think that a lot of times people understand how easy it is to accommodate people with psychiatric disabilities. Some of the things that you can do is something that we build into some accommodations and even stress is for folks that may get overwhelmed a little bit more or have greater anxiety or depression. What we do is we make sure that there's separation between meetings and like thinking time. And so not going into back-to-back meetings, following up with emails sometimes, so providing information in all different types of formats have been helpful for some staff with mental health, offering a modified work schedule. Sometimes if medication is not kicking in the mornings, or they're having a difficult time waking up, you can modify their work schedule to meet the needs of your organization too. So there's so many different accommodations that folks may need, and it really varies. Like we have we have modified work schedules within our organization, but we also have longer breaks between meetings, but we do a variety of different things. I'm trying to remember a couple of them is check-ins, so regular check-ins, and we've also made modifications on our performance review because sometimes folks, if constructive criticism right now can be can trigger somebody, and so making sure that we are providing, you know, a strengths-based annual review to make sure that mental health within all of our staff members are healthy, but also we're really focusing on the strengths and opportunities in a different way versus saying that somebody is completely failing. So it's really, you know, it really depends on what the needs are, but it's very individualized, but you can do things that contribute to positive mental health within the organization.
Gosh, and I feel like this is a great opportunity to plug something that Together SC will be announcing very soon, which is a partnership with First Son to provide a very affordable employee assistance plan. And so be on the lookout, because that's a great way that you can support your employees' mental health and provide them with some additional care and support.
Yeah, and I know another thing that we do too is we break out grant goals, because we all have grant goals, right? We all have to achieve grant goals, but making sure that they are listed in an area or listed how the individual likes it or needs it, because sometimes there may be short-term memory loss, there may be difficulty with retaining information. And so there's strategies that you can really use to ensure that the information that they have to do their job is listed appropriately and something that is easily to follow. So there's so many things, and we can always brainstorm any solutions if you ever get stuck, if you ever just need to chat about possible accommodations or some struggles that you may be having. We're always here.
Well, this has been incredible. We are a few minutes over, but I think it was totally worth it. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around, for being part of this. And gosh, Kimberly, thank you so much for bringing all of this for us. I think it's incredibly helpful and critical as we continue to work on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And I'm sure that everybody is walking away from here much better informed, and I hope that we can do more learning opportunities like this moving forward. Please make sure that if you would like to have some support in increasing accessibility of your organization, make sure you check out Able South Carolina. Their technical assistance team is a tremendous resource in providing partnership for you and thought leadership, making sure that you are able to include people with disabilities in your services and in employment of your organization. And so thank you, everybody, for being here. We will send out the recording a bit later, and we look forward to seeing you all soon.